On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the number one reason that Starbucks failed in Israel and what that has to do with your business. How is it that Starbucks, arguably the most famous coffee chain in the entire world, failed in a country as small as Israel? Not to mention that Israelis are obsessed with their coffee. In 2001, Starbucks opened its first coffee house in Tel Aviv, and less than 2 years later, there wasn't even a trace of the coffee giant to be found anywhere in Israel. So what happened? We're going to break down some of the key factors that led to Starbucks' demise in Israel and explain to you why this has anything to do with your business. Let's start with the ToGo Cup. Now, anyone who's been to Starbucks knows that you go in, you order your venti, mocha, choco, whatever, and you get it in a ToGo Cup. And while this works for most major cities and across the world, it turns out that in Israel, coffee culture is a little bit different. In fact, you rarely will see Israelis walking around with a to-go coffee cup in their hand. Israelis like to sit in a cafe for hours, nursing their coffee in a glass cup until it turns cold. Being served in a to-go cup made Israelis feel rushed and forced to leave. And so while most Israelis were willing to give Starbucks a chance and try it out for the first time, the customer experience disappointed them and they didn't come back. Before long, the few Starbucks stores that existed in Tel Aviv were totally empty, while the other small local competition had their coffee shops completely packed. And that's because they understood Israeli culture in a way that Starbucks didn't. Another mistake Starbucks made was customer value. Now, it's no secret that Starbucks charges you for the Starbucks experience. They have fancy name drinks, they play trendy music. All of that is part of their brand, and that is something that customers value enough to pay money for. Turns out in Israel, this wasn't the case. Not only were Israelis unimpressed with the customer service, they also didn't really care about the Starbucks experience. So while Starbucks could charge for the Starbucks experience in New York or Beijing, turns out in Tel Aviv, people weren't willing to pay. All of this leads us to the number one reason that Starbucks failed in Israel. They just didn't adapt. I'll be the first to admit that it can be very hard to figure out the Israeli consumer, but Starbucks didn't even bother trying. This could have been pretty easily avoided if they'd taken the time to get to know the Israeli consumer and even ask them more of what they wanted. And that leads us to you and what this has to do with your business. Now, it can be really, really frustrating to start your business in Israel, especially when you feel like you don't understand the Israeli consumer. But it's not impossible. And if you take the time to listen and learn about your audience and your target customer, you can adapt accordingly. Nowadays, with Facebook groups and market research, there's so much information out there. All you have to do is look. So don't be like Starbucks. Take the time to learn about the Israeli customer. You might be surprised by how successful you can be.